Establishing immediate control over the center's dark squares sets a versatile stage for white's development. Developing the knight here immediately contests the center and prepares for castling, keeping options open. Developing a knight towards the center prepares for central pawn advances and offers more piece interaction possibilities. Opening up a diagonal for the king's bishop and preparing to challenge the center. Establishing central control, d4 opens diagonals and prepares to develop further, aiming for an advantage in space. Developing the bishop to a long diagonal exerts pressure on white's center and prepares to disrupt white's pawn structure. Fortifying the center and preparing development, this solidifies white's central pawn structure while opening lines for the king's bishop. Securing the monarch's safety allows for a more robust development of the remaining pieces and anticipates potential central pawn breaks. Developing the bishop here aims to prepare kingside castling and pressure the central pawn chain. Challenging the center immediately, black aims to disrupt white's poised development and create dynamic pawn exchanges. Challenging the bishop's placement now, aiming to disrupt black's harmonious development and gain some queenside space. Temporarily relinquishing central pawn control aims to disrupt white's pawn structure, creating potential weaknesses for future exploitation. Recapturing the pawn opens the bishop's diagonal, immediately challenging black's central control and aiming to exploit any uncoordinated pieces. Developing the bishop to an active square, it prepares to contest the central light squares and aims for kingside influence. Developing the knight to its natural square, the knight seeks to influence the center and prepare for kingside castling, reinforcing white's central pawn structure. Developing the knight further solidifies the central pawn chain and prepares for potential pawn breaks, while also reinforcing the queen's knight. Pushing the flank pawn forward aims to seize crucial queenside space and potentially dislodge black's bishop, creating dynamic play. Striking at the center with a pawn thrust unlocks the queenside and challenges white's pawn structure. Reinforcing the center while opening diagonals for the bishop creates a flexible pawn structure. Disrupting white's knight and attacking the queen's diagonal adds immediate dynamism. This pawn thrust aggressively claims central space and forces black's pieces to retreat, creating significant positional pressure. Shifting knights towards the queenside can relieve central pressure. Disrupting black's bishop outpost forces a decision, potentially opening lines or creating positional weaknesses for the queenside. Relocating the bishop to a safer square avoids immediate threats and prepares for potential counterplay on the queenside. Unleashing knight pressure, this move directly challenges black's kingside pawn structure and aims to disrupt their developing harmony. Reorienting the knight to a more central outpost, this maneuver aims to challenge white's pawn structure and prepare for kingside activity. Unleashing a knight to f6, white disrupts black's pawn chain and opens avenues toward the weakened king's flank. Sacrificing the knight on e6 to disrupt white's pawn structure and potentially open lines towards the king. Opening the d-file now forces black's king to endure scrutiny. Seeking refuge from the storm, black tucks the king away, a vital precaution before deeper tactical skirmishes unfold. Unlocking the d-file for your rook, this gambit sacrifice dramatically opens lines towards black's beleaguered monarch. Retrieving the pawn sacrificially opens lines, exposing the king to a swift assault. Securing the king's safety is paramount, finally tucking it away behind pawns while preparing to activate the rooks on open files. Releasing the queen, black aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and stir up tactical possibilities on the kingside. This knight's leap to d5 seizes central control and prepares a decisive assault on black's weakened king. A bold attempt to unblock the king's path, but it leaves the queen's bishop completely uncoordinated. Unveiling an attack on the dark squares, this queen sortie aims to exploit black's exposed king and compromised pawn structure. Seeking counterplay with queenside pressure, but opens a Pandora's box of tactical weaknesses around the monarch. Shifting the queen to protect the bishop and solidify kingside defense. black repositions the queen, seeking queenside activity and potentially creating a new attacking vector to relieve the cramped kingside pressure. The queen's repeated foray into the queenside now faces a stern repositioning, aiming to consolidate the central initiative. Repeating the queen's journey to c2 offers no progress, allowing white to consolidate their central grip and prepare a dangerous kingside assault. Resorting to the queen swap seems inevitable, but its timing remains a strategic puzzle with unclear benefits. Repositioning the queen offers a breathing room and prepares for future queenside play. Unleashing a pawn storm, white dares black to defend their exposed monarch against this central advance. Seeking to unravel white's queenside pressure, this piece relocation aims to regroup and alleviate pawn structure weaknesses. Reclaiming the central open file, white seeks to pressure black's isolated pawns and ignite an offensive. Reactivating the open d-file by bringing the rook into play is a sensible, though somewhat passive, response to white's initiative. Re-establishing pressure on the queenside aims to dislodge black's queen and exploit the now open diagonal. Repositioning the queen seeks to avoid immediate confrontation and prepare for a potential king's side maneuver. Stabilizing the kingside while aiming to exploit the weakened dark squares and potential pawn weaknesses. Seeking to dislodge the enemy knight from its advanced outpost, this maneuver prepares to contest the king's flank. Unveiling the queen to h5 aims to leverage the now exposed kingside darkness and pry open lines toward the black monarch. Reassessing the board's energy, black chooses to reposition the knight, seeking a safer haven after white's aggressive pawn push. Recapturing the bishop on e2 stabilizes the queenside and prepares to consolidate the rook on the d-file, aiming for improved piece coordination. Reclaiming knight activity from the edge revitalizes black's potential counterplay. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, eyeing potential skirmishes and offering renewed pressure. Initiating a slow repositioning, the knight endeavors to escape the central congestion. Unleashing the knight to g4 intensifies pressure on black's kingside, aiming to exploit weakened squares. Sacrificing the knight opens lines, but leaves your king dangerously exposed on the open g-file. Opening the kingside file dramatically sacrifices pawn structure for potential piece activity, aiming to exploit the exposed black king. The knight's reroute aims to reinforce the e-pawn and challenge white's central control. Clearing the third rank for piece activity, the king retreats to a safer square. Reactivating the bishop to a more central diagonal promises activity. Developing the bishop to anchor this diagonal, aiming to control squares crucial for a future kingside assault. Boldly venturing the knight to d4 aims to disrupt white's central control and create counterplay along the semi-open d-file. Exchanging the bishop decisively opens lines, threatening immediate disruption of black's defensive structure. Opening the d-file creates significant threats against your weakened king. Securing the d4 pawn's advance opens lines for your rooks and supports a potential queenside initiative. Unlocking central tension and opening lines for the rook, this pawn thrust disrupts white's solid structure. Pushing the queenside pawn disrupts black's pawn structure and opens lines for white's pieces. Seeking to activate the bishop and perhaps prepare a kingside pawn push. Unlocking f4 aims to crack open the center, creating immediate diagonal threats and potential open lines for the rook. Unleashing the pawn to seize central influence and disrupt white's piece coordination, preparing to activate the light-squared bishop. Opening the d-file with the rook dramatically alters the pawn structure and promises aggressive play. Conceding the open file and conceding the d-pawn's advance presents significant long-term difficulties. Clearing the b-file to gain influence over the d-file presents a subtle but significant positional advantage. Recapturing with the bishop solidifies the pawn structure and aims to challenge the advanced white pawns. Opening the e-file with this pawn thrust offers immediate counterplay, aiming to exploit the exposed black king and potentially disrupt coordination. Seeking to activate the queen and pawn storm, This move neglects the exposed king and weakens the pawn structure further. Bringing the rook to the open file creates immediate pressure on black's position. Venturing the king forward seems questionable given the open files, potentially exposing it to attack. Unlocking the queenside pawns offers a path to activity, hoping to exploit black's somewhat passive bishop. Anchoring the pawn structure for a potential queenside expansion, this defensive maneuver also prepares to contest the open file. Fortifying the central pawn structure, this bishop now anchors control over key diagonals, preparing for potential pawn advances.